My name's Guy Kestevan. I've been a professional bike and kit tester for over 25 years. And today I am really excited to start telling you about something really clever, but potentially really controversial too. Because behind this box is £12,000 worth of specialised S-Works Epic World Cup. The latest hardtail killing, in more ways than one, full suspension XC race bike. So let's get it in the stand and start talking about the tech behind the bike and why this poses some really interesting questions which I'm going to be going into on various rides, various challenges, various head-to-heads over the next month. So here it is in all its beauty, and I have to say, this is a gorgeous looking frame. Particularly liking this kind of Giga Aliens green shimmer effect that they've just put under the lacquer on the front end of this frame set. And then we're going to talk about that shock in detail later, but there's no doubting the integration of that into the top tube is pretty spectacular, because it does even have a linkage in there as well. And then, love them or hate them, you've got that internal headset hose routing there for the rear brake, and the brand new proper gull wing. You've actually got a drop on the stem there. One-piece carbon Roval XCSL cockpit. And talking about the frame, while specialised trail bikes like the Stump Jumper, like the Turbo Levo bikes, the only difference between the S-Works and the lower grade bikes in terms of the frame is a different carbon linkage on the S-Works. They all use the same 11M carbon for the rest of the frame. On the S-Works Epic bikes, that includes this World Cup, the Standard Epic and the Epic Evo, S-Works bikes all get 12M carbon, so they get a lighter, slightly stiffer, well, just more expensive carbon blend on there. So yeah, fact carbon 12M, as you can see down there. And you're going to want to know what this weighs, aren't you? This bike, without tubes in, it comes with tubes just for shipping. It comes with an ultralight 180 gram butyl tube in there. And it also comes with, if you can see it on the workshop there, that little carbon cage with a swap pod on the back of it, which weighs 126 grams. So just to get a pure weight, I've taken the tubes out, I've put sealant in and taken that little combo off it, is 9.61 kilos. And this is a large. And that comes from 1765 gram frame weight for the medium frame with all the fixtures on, according to Specialized. And obviously there's been a lot of comparison between this bike and the Trek Supercaliber, and unsurprisingly they both have this shock under the top tube, flex stay rear end, single pivot down near the chain set architecture to them. But actually, in terms of detail, this shock actually runs on a linkage, and it is a shock. It's only attached at the front end, whereas on the Trek, what they call their ISO strut, is actually a shaft embedded in the top tube that slides along. Interestingly, it's the first shock I can remember since Giant did this on the NRS in the late 90s on their cross-country suspension bike. It's designed to run in its firmest setting with zero sag. But on this World Cup here, you get 75mm of rear wheel travel rather than 60mm of rear wheel travel. And head angle is a lot more relaxed on this World Cup at 66.5 degrees. So it's a lot more stable in steering than the Trek. And with the 465mm reach in this large, it's longer as well. And it's also 135 grams lighter than the Trek. So things definitely look to be in the favour of the S-Works World Cup compared to that Supercaliber. And they certainly had a great opening weekend at the World Cup with it, in terms of Laura Stigger taking the first short track race of the season on her brand new S-Works World Cup. However, things get interesting when you start comparing this bike to the rest of the Specialized range. And interestingly, while Christopher Blevins, their pro racer, is being kind of instrumental in the marketing around this bike, he's appeared on most of the promo videos, he even talks you through shock setup on their website, he actually chose to ride the Specialized Epic Evo. Not the Epic, not the 100mm travel automatic brained race bike, but the Epic Evo 110mm travel, and what Specialized generally term their kind of lightweight trail bike. Because interestingly, that bike, the frame and shock setup is actually 106 grams lighter than this Epic World Cup. So although Blevins was running a version with remote lockout, which probably, brought the weight up to a similar level to this, because the normal bikes run a standard sort of flick switch rear shock on there, it's interesting that Blevins actually chose to ride the longer travel bike. I mean, it's actually, head angle is pretty much the same. Geometry is very, very similar between the two. I should say this seat angle on this is 74.5, which is, it's pretty conventional, to be honest, but it's certainly not as radical as something like Scott's new scale, which goes up to 78 degrees for that more aggressive forward pedaling position. But then Blevins' choice kind of makes more sense when you consider that this bike isn't intended as a replacement for their full suspension range. It's actually intended as a replacement for their hardtail bikes. He's actually been quoted as saying it's a hardtail killer, which again is interesting because this frame is something like 900 grams heavier than the Epic hardtail, and while you can still get top-end spec on the Epic hardtail at the moment, it will be moved down to lower spec versions, sort of more affordable versions, which is, again, quite surprising. I mean, the frame has been around for a while, but it's still very much a cutting-edge race bike, is the Epic hardtail. And in terms of complete bike weight, my Chisel alloy-framed Specialized hardtail in various project builds, I've actually got down to 8.95 kilos. So that's about almost 700 grams lighter than this top-of-the-range S-Works bike. So let's have a look at the whole package. Let's have a look at the detail. And in particular, let's have a look at what's going on with the suspension. And that all pretty much comes down to this custom RockShox Sid Lux WCID shock. I mean, wicked. I don't even know if they've explained the acronym. But what they run it around is what they call full gulp, half gulp, and zero gulp. I'm not sure yet if this system is genius or primitive. Well, it's both, really. You set how much sag you want, because, like I say, full gulp is, I think, 4 mil of sag, and then half gulp is 2 to 3 mil of sag. That's your kind of intermediate setting. What you do is you completely depressurize the shock, and then you press this little brass button here, which allows a certain amount of air to bleed across into the negative. If you want half gulp, you move it to that halfway shaft point there on this 40mm stroke shock, and that gives you a little bit of plushness, but more of a hardtail feel. And then if you want what they call full gulp, you fully compress the shock and then transfer the negative pressure across to it and then reinflate it. So, and that gives you more of a plush feel off the top, sort of a miniature suspension feel. And then you've got compression and rebound damping up the top there. But as you can see here, it is a proper shock. You've got the shock bolt at the mount there, and harder to see in there, you've actually got a tiny little swing linkage. So you have got, so it helps structurally support the frame, but it also slightly changes the shock rate, although not by a massive amount, certainly. And then you've got this little bolt-in shoe here that locks it all onto the front end of the seat stays. And then you've got flex stays coming down to the rear end here. And then your main pivot in kind of the classic position, really, just bang center to the chain set and just level with the top of the teeth. And it runs a 34-tooth chainring as standard. So theoretically, you could change the anti-squat effect slightly by running a larger or smaller chainring. But I think for cross-country athletes, certainly for short track specialists like Blevins, they're going to be wanting to go 34 or even larger on this bike. And then coming around to the front, you've got this RockShox SID SL Ultimate with Specialized specific brain damping in there. So it's the lightest of the SID chassis with the 32mm legs and the heavily machined crown here. But you've got this more traditional, I mean, Specialized has been using this for over 20 years now, but this brass mass sprung loaded inertia valve in there, what they call brain fade setting on this. It's got progressively more subtle, there's less of a clunk now if you have it in the lower settings, and hopefully, I mean, like I say, I've not ridden this bike yet, hopefully that's going to be even smoother now. So got this bump sensitive suspension up front, and then this more set it and forget it system at the back, which when I first heard about how this shock worked, I was surprised, definitely. I was expecting maybe a remote lockout in terms of an electronic lockout, because RockShox do have that flight attendant fully electronic system now, which they're using on the enduro bikes, longer travel bikes. But this, like I say, it's surprisingly crude and effective. You know, you cannot change this mid-race. You've got to completely depressurize the shock and then reset it. Although, well, Specialized say there are 3 settings on the shock. I'm presuming that if you vary where that sag is set up when you depressurize it and then repressurize it, in terms of the shock position, you can have quarter gulp or 2/3 gulp or pretty much any infinite feel within that. But obviously that's part of the experimentation I'm going to be doing moving on with the bike. Moving back to other features on the frame, you've got a 2-position bottle mount on the down tube. You've got a secondary bottle position there, so you can run the full twin bottle setup if you want to. As I say, it comes with that swap box and carbon cage already on it. That put your tube in there and your CO2 cartridge as well if you fold them up carefully. You've got a little MRP chain guide on top there, just fixes onto that main pivot. You've got a nice little gusset there, so the back gap on the back of the frame for the internal cable routing doesn't let dirt in. And then you've got a nice ridged chainstay protector all along there. And as you can see on this top of the range race bike, you've got a top of the range race transmission from SRAM. So you've got the double-sided Quark power meter version of the XXSL hollow carbon armed crankset. Like I say, 34 tooth chain ring on there. You've got the new flat top chain. You've got the XXSL rear mech with carbon cage. You've got the new T-type direct mounting onto the back of the frame there, and that means you've got the T-type cassette, which sits right against the frame there for maximum accuracy, maximum smoothness of shifting, even under serious load. And obviously this is a bike designed to be super stiff. I mean, actually that's one thing I haven't really talked about. One of the big things that Specialized say, presuming they mean that over bikes like the Epic and the Epic Evo, which are quite a flexible frame, I'm expecting this to be super rigid, and that is, you know, somewhere where this maximum power shifting of the new T-type transmission is really going to come in. Although, you know, it is slightly slower across the block than the previous axis system, which is something I'm going to go into in a separate video later stage. And then moving up to the rest of the spec, you've got this, again, touted as hyper stiff Roval new one-piece cockpit up there. You've got the new Roval seat post in there. You've got power saddle with carbon rails on there. So again, that's all in-house kit. You've got Roval Control SL wheels, which have the Superlight hub in there, but you still, one nice detail, you still get the oversized torque cap adapters on the end, which match into the dropouts on the forks for maximum steering stiffness. I really, really rate these wheels. They're just over 1,200 grams, but 30mm rim profile on them. And I don't know if you can see down there, but you've got a distinctive lip on the outside of the rim there, which gives them extra resilience and also means you're less likely to pinch flat these tyres, which is a good job because these Fast Track S-Works are incredibly light, around about 600 gram tyres this, and still a 2.35 tread with a reasonable amount of bite on them. One of my favourite sort of down-country fast trail tyres or race tyres, these for all conditions. Big fan of the current Specialized tyre range right the way through. And then what's interesting on the back, though, is you don't get the S-Works spec. They've been relatively conservative. They've put it onto the Control carcass, so it's a slightly heavier duty, tougher carcass. So maybe because you've got less travel on there, and maybe because you'll be running it in a more rigid setup some of the time, they've basically given you a tyre with a bit more strength and a bit more beef rather than running the S-Works on the back of there. And that's the Renegade tread. And then moving back up front, you've got that SRAM T-type transmission there. It's directly mounted onto the lever clamp there for these new Level Ultimate stealth routed brakes. So Level Ultimate means you've got carbon lever on there, you've got bearings in the levers for maximum feel, and then stealth means it's got this new curved inwards towards the bar hose routing on there. And it's a 2-pot level as well. They do a 4-pot caliper, which is more their down country sort of trail setup, but these are the slightly less powerful but slightly lighter calipers front and rear, and 180mm rotor on the front, and then 160mm as you would expect. And also, just if you go through the spec with a fine-tooth comb, you realise things like the seat binder bolt is titanium. They've got ultralight bolts in the brake mountings as well. So they really have chased grams out of this bike wherever possible. And one thing I haven't really dwelled on is the fact that you actually get a fixed post on here, not a dropper post. And I guess if you're going to use the bike on a course where you'd normally use a hardtail, then having a fixed post isn't such a bad idea. And anyway, there is a little slot in the head cap there that you could feed a dropper post cable into. So that's the complete build. Like I say, this is 9.61 kilos. And while this spec is clearly insanely expensive, Pro model of the bike gets the slightly heavier 11M frame. It gets a conventional cockpit. It gets Roval control wheels with control casing tyres rather than the SL wheels with S-Works tyres on the front. And it still gets T-type, but it gets Exo T-type. So that's an alloy crankset, but with a spindle-based power meter. So it's just single-sided power readings. But that comes in at £8,500 in the UK. And I've been chatting to Dave Rome from Escape Collective and the Geek Warning podcast, and he's got a Pro in medium, and that comes in at 10.4 kilos, and that's with tubes in. So actually there's only about 700, 800 grams in difference once you factor in. I think Dave rides a medium and I've got a large. So the actual weight difference is pretty small for £3,500, which makes the Pro sound like the better option as the privateer, more realistic build. You're still getting that same rear shock technology, you're still getting a brain front fork, and you're still getting things like the superlight carbon seat post. Just doesn't say S-Works in massive shiny letters on the downshift. Oh, and it gets a fully painted frame as well, rather than this green shimmering fade at the front and then naked unidirectional carbon fibre rear. So there we go. There's the introduction to this stunning looking new bike. But if it seemed like I'm a bit all over the place with talking about it and thoughts about it, it's because I am really. I mean, there's a very, very interesting move by Specialized to can off their entire top race range of hardtails in favour of a short travel, effectively a softail bike, and still keep both of their race-based full suspension bikes. So the next month is basically going to be me spending my time doing as many different rides as I can on this bike to see where it absolutely kills it, if it absolutely kills me in some circumstances, and just work out what Specialized have done right and what Specialized have done wrong, in my opinion. But obviously, it would be great to have your feedback and input on that. If there's anything specific you'd like to see me do on it. I've got 100mm full suspension bikes I can test this against. I've got fully rigid ultralight hardtails I can test this against. Or even, I mean, the Specialized Chisel, that's a pretty fluid, flowing bike, which, you know, it's certainly not a brutally stiff hardtail in the normal race sense. So that'll be an interesting comparison. There's all sorts of different head-to-heads I can do and different challenges I can put this bike through over the month that Specialized are letting me have it. So please get in touch below with any comments, suggestions or questions you have about this bike. But for now, massive thanks to Specialized UK for letting me have the bike. Super, super excited to get onto it. Huge thanks to my Patreon supporters who sponsor the channel on a monthly basis, and they'll be getting extended edits of and behind the scenes edits as I go through the testing process, heading towards that final opinion. So If you really want the background detail on this process, then make sure you join up on Patreon and you'll get those edits ad-free as a thank you as well. But click for notifications so you know when the final review comes up, and other reviews based around this bike. There's a T-type transmission review already. There's Roval Control SL wheels review I've got to do. I should do a review on all the specialised tyres as well, because like I say, I've been running them for years now. I'm super keen on those. So there's a whole load of packaging to go on around this. And if you wouldn't mind, give this video a thumbs up so that YouTube know you like it and they will share it with more people. But for now, I've been Guy Kestevan on Guy Kes TV, getting very excited to get ready to ride the new Specialized S-Works Epic World Cup. So now I've just got to slap some pedals on it and find out just how fast this bike is.